emerging standards to improve the security and quality of your IT environments. We'll be uploading a video of today's presentation to RDX's YouTube channel and a copy of the presentation slides to SlideShare tomorrow morning. All participants will be sent a follow-up email that includes a link that will allow you to view the video on YouTube and download a copy of the slides from SlideShare. By default, GoToWebinar mutes all participants except the speaker, and that's a good thing because it's going to reduce the chances of background noise affecting the presentation. Like all RDX Insight Series presentations, we're going to hold questions until the end. There's a button on the GoToWebinar panel that will allow you to type your questions in. Kelly, who's the webinar's organizer, will bundle them up and we'll discuss them at the end. We want to be respectful of your time. We know that many of you will have meetings right after this one. We've timed the presentation to allow Q&A at the end, but if we're in danger of running over, MegaplanIT and RDX can respond to any remaining questions by email. Our intent is to have these RDX Insights presentations monthly. Next month's presentation will be an overview of Microsoft's Business Intelligence suite of products. We'll provide an overview of the Power BI and SSIS, AS, and RS products. We'll discuss how they complement each other and where they overlap. We'll finish with an in-depth demo of Microsoft Power BI, which is attracting an increasing amount of attention from the BI community. The demo will be provided by Jeremy Fry, who is RDX's BI Service Delivery Manager. Jeremy has a decade of experience working in the BI space, and his team supports dozens of BI environments. I also distribute a monthly newsletter that you might be interested in. You don't have to be a customer to receive it. This month's newsletter includes an article on Microsoft Cosmos DB, which is intended to be a NoSQL competition killer. It supports most of the major NoSQL data storage models all in one database product. The newsletter also provides links to 10 videos on Power BI, which were recorded at a recent Microsoft Data Insights conference. It also contains articles that provide deep dives into 3 popular cloud DB offerings: Amazon's AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Oracle Cloud, which is really coming on strong. There's a recent Forbes article that you can find that shows that Oracle's revenues in the cloud space are growing faster than any other competitor. If you'd like to be added to the newsletter's distribution list, let me know. I'll display my email as well as a link to allow you to view a sample copy and sign up on the last slide of the presentation. You can also add me as your LinkedIn buddy. I write a lot of articles and SlideShare presentations on wide-ranging tech topics. So let's get started with today's presentation. We're pleased to announce that today's installment of the RDX Insight series will be a joint presentation with one of our auditing firms, MegaplanIT. MegaplanIT is a PCI qualified security assessor and has an excellent reputation in the security industry. MegaplanIT will provide an overview of some of the more popular industry standards and regulatory requirements. We'll continue the presentation with a deeper discussion on 2 of the industry standards that RDX adheres to: AICPA SOC and PCI DSS. MegaplanIT will do a deep dive into PCI and then pass the presentation baton back to RDX. I'll provide an overview of AICPA SOC and our PCI and SOC compliance projects, why we chose to adhere to these standards, the steps we performed to initially adhere to their control objectives, and we'll finish the presentation by reviewing some implementation and ongoing adherence best practices. So once again, my name is Chris Foote, and I'm a VP at RDX. I've been in the database business for about 30 years. I've performed a varied set of services for my employers during this time, starting my career as an entry-level DBA. I've also managed RDX's service delivery teams, and I've worked in high-tech database think tanks for both Bank of New York Mellon and Alcoa. My experience is pretty much split, with 15 years as a purchaser of remote services and 15 years as a provider. As you can tell by the host of acronyms in Mike's title, he's well-versed in security and auditing. Mike has close to 20 years of experience in the security industry, so between the 2 of us, we have 50 years of experience in IT. It's a good combination for this presentation. I'm not showing this slide as a cheap advertisement for our services. What I'm attempting to show is that RDX has experience monitoring and administering a wide range of environments. We support thousands of databases and operating systems. This includes cloud IaaS, DBP AAS, on-premises, relational, NoSQL, commercial and open source database products. One of the benefits that RDX can provide to all shops is our wide range of expertise. It's just the nature of our business. We support close to 500 customers, so we aren't constrained by any one organization's tech stack. we're required to administer virtually every database feature you can think of for every product we support. We work with dozens and dozens of different tech stack combinations. RDX is currently responsible for not only securing our environment, but as database and O administrators, we are also responsible for helping our customers secure close to 10,000 servers. With all the shenanigans that could occur, we constantly review our security practices, procedures, and chosen tool sets and feature implementations. Improving our security posture was also one of the reasons that we chose to adhere to PCI, even though we don't store or process credit card swipe data for our customers. RDX achieved its first SSAE 16 SOC 1 report in 2011 and our first SOC 2 in 2016. We received our first PCI report on compliance, also called a ROC, from one of the top auditing firms in the country, and engaged MegaplanIT to provide a QSA examination in 2016. In addition, because we remotely support close to 500 customers, with each having their own unique security and quality control strategies, we are asked to comply with literally dozens and dozens of control objectives that are unique to our customers. We not only comply with industry standards, but also a vast array of customer-specific security and administrative activity control requirements. I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mike Vitolo. Mike, I'm going to give you control. Once you display the presentation, Kelly will let you know how it works. So let me give you control. Okay, Mike, I've made you the presenter. Man, I see your screen.
Excellent, Chris. Thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen.
That looks good.
Perfect. Thank you. So part of QSA, being a QSA and going through these type of engagements, it's a very rigorous standard, of course. It's very specific around each individual requirement, sub-requirements. Generally, there's probably about over 400 requirements that a client should go through, a merchant service provider, of course, that also is determined by their scope. We'll get a little bit more detail into the requirements, more about the interpretation of, whether you should focus on specific things in the beginning of an assessment more towards the middle as well. So a little bit about MegaplanIT. We're a security and compliance firm. We have probably about 33 professional services ranging from compliance to penetration testing, and as well as managed service in addition to that. Some of our compliance services are, PCI QSA, PA QSA, P2PE. We do a blend of NIST as well, 171, 53, cybersecurity, ISO 27001, 02 risk assessments. On the other hand, we also cover some security penetration testing as well as internal, external, mobile, wireless, social engineering. A new offering for our services is our managed security services, which focuses on SIEM, asset discovery, log aggregation, threat detection, IDS, FIM. That's all managed within our SOC. Some of the wide range of services around compliance, they tend to complement one another. For example, like PCI focuses on anything that store, processes, and transmits credit card data, where the payment application more focuses around the payment module itself that resides within the PCI environment. Each one of these, when you're dealing with anything around ISO, HIPAA, NERC, SIP, or anything around NIST, the requirements are somewhat similar in some circumstances. You might have a little different sets of standards for, like, for example, HIPAA, where the password complexity might be 6, where with PCI might be 7. But your general controls across any compliance standard or framework, access control, physical security, encryption, logging and auditing, management, if you're incorporating one standard, they tend to blend across multiple standards as well. So it kind of helps that organization meet and achieve compliance across any standard that requires specific information to be protected in a certain fashion. Here's a couple other standards as well. Of course, RDX meeting the SAS 18 SOC 2 as well as PCI. When you're dealing with anything around NIST, NIST 53 deals more with the FedRep standard, where 171 deals more of the controlled unclassified information. It's any organization that takes sensitive data from a government organization and brings it into their private sector. So next set of slides, we're going to actually move into the PCI realm, starting out with the Standard Council, the PCI DSS Standard Council. Generally, this organization incorporates the training for the QSAs, mandates the professionalism and accuracy of their reports. So they'll use their specific AQM program to validate that the QSAs follow the guidelines for developing a report on compliance, that's an ROC, I'm sorry about that, as well as an attestation of compliance, an AOC. For that sense, they also train internal security assessors as well. These can be individuals that are partaking in your organization to assess your environment to achieve compliance. They are mandated from the card brands, which is American Express, MasterCard, Discover, JCB, and Visa. They incorporate the PCI aspect of it, but they also incorporate the SAQ, the self-assessment questionnaires. The responsibilities of a qualified security assessor. A qualified security assessor must be or part of a QSAC, which is a qualified security assessor company. These are independent organizations that are sponsored by the card brands and trained and certified by the PCI Council. Some of their responsibilities are to assist in the validation of their client's scope for the assessment. That's generally a combination of where both teams work together to discover where the card data resides, where it's stored, where it's processed, and determine that that's the specific scope for their report on compliance. Verify all technical information provided by the service provider or merchant. This is any documentation around policies, procedures, standards, samples. Another responsibility as part of this assessment is to perform an on-site assessment. So this can be something that is anywhere from 1 to 5 days at max. Generally, the assessor will go on site to conduct specific interviews to ensure that those groups of individuals are actually understanding the qualifications of those controls and the documentation that was provided. Another part of this is also to evaluate any competent control, which is, of course, to be above and beyond the actual requirement in the event that the requirement is not met. And finally, to produce a final report on compliance and attestation of compliance. The payment card security standard is essentially, it's an industry standard, but it's not a legal requirement. The major card brands, of course, sponsor this standard. They've concluded to one specific, for example, the PCI 3.2 standard, which is enforced by the council to the QSAs and assessed by the QSAs. There are specific fines and penalties in the event that a specific merchant doesn't meet compliance. That is, of course, inherited by your processing bank and can be pushed down to the merchant. Service providers, depending on how you inject within the storing, processing, and transmitting credit card data, could require you to go through PCI DSS as well. There are certain standards for PCI, PCI PTS, which is dealing with your PIN transactions, security devices, your PCI PADSS, which is your payment application, your payment module. So if you go to, like, for example, a Target or a Walmart, it's the PIN pad device, the payment application that's taking your transaction for processing. PCI DSS is your payment industry data security standard. This is anything that a merchant or service provider would go through for their assessments. And then, of course, P2P covers encryption, decryption, and key management. There are specific levels for service providers and merchants. Merchant can be anywhere from 1 through 4, depending on your transaction volume. For service providers, there's only 2 levels, and the only thing you can be required to do from an SAQ is an SAQD. With the merchants, it's a little bit different. You have the ability to actually cover a variety of different SAQs, self-assessment questionnaires, A, B, C, D, and there's also an SAQ P2P as well. Roles and responsibilities of the card brands essentially are around tracking and enforcing. These are going to be penalties, fines, and compliance deadlines. Of course, these would be pushed directly from the processor down to the merchant. Validation process, who needs to be validated. Another aspect of is any intent of an investigation due to a compromise would be the direct responsibility of those card brands. And that, of course, comes down to also monitoring and facilitating any investigation, as well as account data compromise to completion. Roles and responsibilities of the merchants and service providers. First and foremost is to understand the actual PCI requirements, to understand what level, what rigor, whether that's a level 1 report on compliance, or if you're doing a level 2 through 4, for a merchant, that would be, of course, an SAQ. To ensure that the proper reporting requirements are defined by the card brands and also communicated effectively their compliance status to their processing banks. At that point, the most important things around also, being a merchant or a service provider is to understand your goals and objectives. Like, this is not a point in time assessment. This is, you should keep PCI compliance throughout the course of the year, making sure you maintain the proper security controls and preparation for an assessment. Some of the items that really come across when a merchant or service provider doesn't meet compliance, or the risk of being, compromised, is essentially damage to the reputation or the brand. Investigation costs, remediation costs, it can essentially put a company out of business. These can be substantial to some organizations, and essentially the cost to maintaining compliance is much less than the cost if you were to be compromised and have to inherit some of these fines, fees, rate changes, risk to the brand reputation as well. So what is PCI? As I stated a little bit earlier, this is anything around any organization that stores, processes, and/or transmits credit card data. The definition up there is directly out of the council's website. So from that perspective, it's very specific. A lot of organizations will come and say, well, I only transmit the data, would I be in scope? Or I'm encrypting the data, would I be in scope? And that is part of PCI, is if you are encrypting it, or if you're transmitting it, if you're even accessing an environment that is PCI specific, you are in scope for PCI DSS assessment. A company like RDX, for example, who maintains client environments, they are PCI certified. They've gone through those list of requirements, the 400 plus requirements to achieve that standard. So generally, understanding your scope is the first step you should take when working with PCI DSS. From that point, once you identify scope, identifying what policies, procedures, and standards are applicable to your assessment. Every organization is different. Every vector of that industry is going to be completely different. So you might have some things that are in place. You might have some things that are not applicable because maybe you outsourced it to another vendor, or you just don't perform that specific portion of business. Like, for example, storing credit card data, where you would not be required for requirement 3, which is around encrypting data rendered encrypted, or encrypting it to a point to where it's rendered unreadable. Your assessment normally takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on the maturity of your organization in the sense of going through this type of engagement. Usually clients net new take anywhere around 6 months. Clients that have gone through this before, roughly around 3 to 4 months. When we go through an assessment, we break it out in a certain fashion of requirements and their sub-requirements. For example, requirement 1 is focused around things such as your network diagrams, your data flow diagrams, the data flow diagrams with the actual narratives. We'll look at any ingress and egress traffic from your firewalls and your rule sets within your routers and your switches. We'll determine, what ports, services, and protocols are going ingress and egress. Any of them considered risky to the organization. We'll look at your personal firewalls on your end devices to make sure that they are enabled and they're not. You cannot alter those firewall configs. And of course, then we'll look at security policies and procedures around network devices. When we move into requirement 2, that's ensuring that defaults are changed. So things like passwords that maybe came with your Cisco device. We'll look at your configuration standards, your hardening standards. We'll look at make sure that there's some type of benchmark associated with those config standards or golden image. We'll look at things also around asset management. Are you tracking your assets? That's very important to PCI, especially around scoping. If you don't know your assets, you don't know where your data is residing, it's very hard to scope that in your environment. When we're dealing with requirement 3, this is around encryption. This is essentially around how long you're retaining the data. You're copying full track 1, track 2 data. Are you rendering the data unreadable at rest? And if you have the proper key management. Around requirement 4, this is encryption over transmission. So essentially, when you're transferring it over an untrusted network, public network, are you encrypting it with your TLS 1.2? Or VPN IPsec as well. Requirement 5 is around antivirus, making sure you're able to detect malware, adware, spyware. It's running on platforms as well throughout your environment, your CD, your cardholder environment. And also part of requirement 5 is to ensure that you're logging and auditing any detection of malware, spyware, and adware for 3 months online or 1 year off or on. When you're dealing with requirement 6, this is around patch management. This is also going to be covering your change control process, your software development lifecycle, OWASP top 10, and your WAF firewall. So those are going to be the common factors of requirement 6. Requirement 7 is around access control, roles and responsibilities, access rights to specific cardholder environment and data as well. Requirement 8 is going to be around unique user IDs and passwords, making sure that you're rotating them every 90 days. They're a specific length within your organization, 7 characters, alphanumeric, utilizing 2-factor authentication as well. Requirement 9 is around the physical security, your badge access, your logs. If any visitors come into your physical security environment, they're tracked, they're monitored, escorted. Cameras or any badge access within that facility is documented and defined. Requirement 10 is around your login and auditing. Time, date, stamp of any individual who has access into a platform or database that does contain cardholder data. A common mistake within this specific requirement is capturing all the logs, right? So we'll have organizations say, well, my applications are communicating constantly. My log aggregations is too much data for our environment. For PCI, it focuses specifically on individual access and not application communication. Also part of requirement 10 is your file integrity monitoring for 10.5. It also covers time and date stamp of your system, so your NTP, and then retention of those logs, 3 months online, 1 year off or on. Requirement 11 focuses around wireless detection. It focuses also on internal external scanning, internal external application penetration testing. It covers also file integrity monitoring as well as IDS or IPS. And then finally, to cover requirement 12, which is more or less around your security policy procedures. Most importantly, requirement 12.8.2, which is vendor specific. Make sure any vendor you utilize is either attesting to PCI and or PCI compliant. So generally, this is a very high level overview. Of course, this can take days and days of training to cover, but from a summary standpoint, this is how your assessor is going to focus on your environment. These are the key components that they will focus on to make sure that everything's in place and in accordance with the DSS standard. One of the things I like to recommend to any clients or any company that's going through this assessment is to build an internal team and build an internal program associated with this, test your internal controls, and of course to start a few months earlier than your assessment so you get ahead of that engagement with regards to validating that controls are kept up current as well as validated and in place. This helps your QSA, this helps your internal assessment as well, and maintaining your compliance status. Also, leverage your QSA for guidance. Utilize them to help you develop and build an internal program and to test that program's efficiency. Because again, this is not just a one snapshot in time assessment. This should be maintained throughout the year. The final slide that we have here is just information around the PCI DSS Security Standard Council. They do have a website you can visit. There's a lot of data up there. There's a lot of documentation. They have a lot of white papers focused on segmentation testing to competent controls. So these are very helpful tips, that you can utilize even around penetration testing. That's their guidance documentation. Megaplan, of course, has their blog white papers as well that help our clients and anybody else out there that would love to know a little bit more about what I can do to get started and some of the helpful tips around me either achieving or maintaining compliance. At this point, Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you if there's any questions at this point.
I'd like to thank MegaplanIT for providing a really great start to today's webinar. Kelly, how's my presentation look? Does it look all right?
Yes, it looks great, Chris.
Oh, good deal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with an overview of SOC. Then we really want to get into the best practices, right? The strategies and best practices that RDX learned along the way when we initially implemented and our ongoing adherence to both SOC and AICPA and PCI, right? So, it's pretty easy to understand why RDX chose to adhere to AICPA SOC, as it's really the de facto standard that customers use to evaluate the quality of service providers. Our Service Organization Controls Report, or SOC for short, is one of the first documents that our customers ask for. So in the first packet of information we send to customers, we include a white paper that summarizes our adherence to SOC2 and PCI DSS. We chose to move up the ladder from a SOC 1 to a SOC 2 because SOC 2 expands the scope of the audit and the depth examination. Moving from a SOC 1 to a SOC 2 was just the next step of the process for us. Certainly our adherence to SOC 1 made our jump to a SOC 2 easier than if we'd have just went straight from no adherence directly to a SOC 2. The firm that we chose to provide our SOC audits is Snyder Downs. They're a nationally known auditing firm with an excellent reputation in their industry. The American Institute of CPAs, AICPA, that's the governing body behind the SOC reports. The SOC reports, they originally began as a SAS 70, which really focused on financial reporting. But as more and more shops began leveraging them for general services, the AICPA realized that the SAS 70 controls really weren't sufficient for those types of audits. So that led to the birth of the SSAE 16, which focuses on the service organization system. The SSAE 16 was recently improved by adding additional subservice controls, and they renamed it to an SSAE 18. The SOC 1 reports, they focus on the service organization controls that would be relevant during an audit of their customers' financial statements. The SOC control objectives focus on both business and information technology processes. A SOC 1 can be a Type 1 report or a Type 2. The difference is that Type 1 is for a specified point in time, and a Type 2 is for a time period. But there's really no difference in the control objectives themselves. A SOC 2 builds upon a SOC 1. We'll learn more about the standard SOC control objectives in upcoming slides, but for now, we can describe a SOC 2 as including the typical controls that would be in a SOC 1 and criteria from one or more of the AICPA's 5 trust service principles. The AICPA's 5 trust service principles are availability, security, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. The key is that shops don't have to adhere to all 5 trust principles to achieve a SOC 2. They work with their auditing firm to determine which of the 5 principles best apply to their organization. A SOC 2, because of the detailed information it contains, it's usually not made generally available to the public. The audit work for a SOC 3 is essentially the same as a SOC 2, but the report for a SOC 3 is at a higher level, has less details, and it's more of a general use report. As I stated earlier, RDX's top priority is to safeguard our customers' information. Now, that means not only securing the data, but making sure it is available to our customers and users at all times. We view our compliance initiatives as projects that help us improve the quality of our support, both in administrative services and the security of our and our customers' environments. We're measuring ourselves against a set of well-defined industry standards. Measuring the quality of our administrative activities against an industry standard allows us to feel comfortable knowing that we're attempting to achieve the goal of providing the highest quality support possible. We certainly have a robust set of internal quality controls that we self-audit ourselves upon, but we also want to leverage industry-defined standards to evaluate the quality of our support activities. High quality service equals happy customers. Customers are happy, we're happy, everybody's happy. We're also in a very competitive market arena. Our competitors range from 2 guys at a garage to global outsourcing firms, the big boys. Now, since we're a remote services provider, the number one question our customers ask is, how do you secure your services? And that's quickly followed by, how do I know you're going to provide high quality administration and monitoring support to my organization? One of the mechanisms we use, in addition to the traditional customer testimonials, white papers, team resumes, to make our case, is our compliance with well-known industry standards. Let's focus on RDX's recommended general best practices for compliance projects. We learned a lot and took our lumps along the way. Selecting the appropriate project personnel, as we all know, it's critical to the success of any project. The challenge is that with compliance initiatives, they affect virtually every area of the organization. As you move through the initial stages of the project, you may find that you'll need to add additional members to the team. The initial analysis of the control objectives often result in the team finding out that its scope of impact is far greater than initially thought, and they need to add additional representatives to either actively participate in the project or be made aware of its activities. The challenge becomes keeping the size of the project and work teams to manageable levels. Of course, you're going to have to sell the projects to management and the rest of the shop to ensure that they're viewed as critical initiatives. Management's going to have to foot the bill for the project costs, and the units affected, they're either have to change the way they do business to adhere to the control objectives, or they're going to begin needing to collect information to use as evidence for the audit process. We also recommend that you self-educate, pretty much what MegaplanIT recommended, that you self-educate as much as possible before you contact the auditing firms and start your audit. Having a basic understanding of the terms and the control objectives help make those initial meetings much more productive. You don't want to pay an auditing firm to educate your personnel on basic auditing terms and the mechanisms used to measure compliance. So here's a key takeaway from today's presentation. When we first became involved with PCI, we downloaded the PCI control objectives. We copied them into a spreadsheet, and we added several columns. These columns included applicable, not applicable, notes. Could we comply by using our current tech stack, or would we need to purchase additional hardware and software? We also had columns for the unit responsible for complying with that control objective, how they would comply, the evidence they would provide, as well as their criteria for pass-fail. We were certainly required to make modifications, but that upfront work gave us a big head start on the project. We all know how important communication is to any activity. One of the key meetings comes at the tail end of that process. RDX held meetings with the auditing firms to perform a final review of the control objectives, how we intended to comply, the evidence we would provide, the medium we would use to provide that evidence, and the criteria for pass-fail. What we were trying to do is just prevent a miscommunication from leading to an audit hit. Because we were new to the process, we still had issues because the auditor stated one thing, we misinterpreted it, and we had to correct later. Well, you're getting an audit hit for a true failure to comply happens. What you don't want to make sure is that an easily preventable communication problem doesn't lead to audit hits. Here's another key takeaway. We also self-audited and we continue to do so. Based on the amount of evidence generated for the control objective, the complexity of the objective, and its overall importance to the framework, we would review evidence weekly, monthly, and quarterly. When we first started, we self-audited much more frequently than we do now, but we still have self-audit action items scheduled weekly, monthly, and quarterly. Self-auditing allows us to identify evidence anomalies. The evidence being returned didn't match any of the criteria we agreed upon with the auditing firm during our pass-fail discussions. In addition, your shops can be required to perform recurring work activities to adhere to control objectives. You're going to review logs, software updates. You're going to have incident response tests, DR tests, security reviews. These activities will need to be performed on schedules that range from daily to yearly. RDX creates recurring work requests in ServiceNow for each activity and assigns it to the team responsible. The recurring work request requires that they be completed by the due date, and they provide evidence that the activity was performed. So it really helps us to make sure we don't miss anything. A key point is that maintaining adherence to a set of control objectives can actually be more challenging than initial compliance. We all know that the only constant in business and IT ops is change itself, and those changes may impact your compliance initiatives. New or modified business operations and IT administrative activities and hardware and software additions and modifications may lead to issues with compliance. All shops have to maintain constant vigilance to ensure you don't get surprised during your next audit. We're going through a period of rapid growth here at RDX. The amount of evidence we have to provide to MegaplanIT and Schneider Downs is also growing. This growth of evidence data has required us to automate as much of the evidence collection and display as possible. We've built several in-house apps that automatically collect and display audit evidence. We presented the specs to the auditors, showed them how we're going to automate evidence collection, how we're going to display it, to ensure that they were comfortable with the new process. RDX created a team to self-educate themselves on the AICPA audit process and the different SOC reports and types. We had a fairly strong understanding of the SOC control framework before we began the auditing firm evaluation process. What we particularly liked about the SOC framework is that in addition to the industry-specified control objectives we had to adhere to, we were also required to work with Schneider Downs to create a set of self-defined controls. RDX interviewed a number of customers and asked them how they measured the quality of RDX's support activities. We generated common themes of customer-defined measurements, added our own internal standards, and then met with the auditors to create a unique set of security and quality control objectives that we felt most effectively evaluated the services we provide. We evaluate those customers defined as well as RDX's self-measurements regularly to ensure they continue to effectively measure our service quality. The best practices on this slide, they pretty much mimic what I provided in the compliance project hints and tips slide. We found a wealth of SOC 1 and SOC 2 educational information on the AICPA website. In addition, we found a lot of info relating to SOC 1 and SOC 2 and auditing and compliance firm websites. We created the customary project team, assigned project managers, team managers, project champion, technical and business project subject matter experts. Once again, good communication was essential. All the teams that were identified as potentially having to change their processes were responsible for auditable activities or provide audit evidence were kept informed throughout the entire project life cycle. They knew what activities they performed are going to be audited, what evidence they were required to provide, and what constituted a pass-fail. RDX performed a traditional vendor analysis to select an auditing firm to assist us in our SOC 1 compliance. One of the critical evaluation criteria we used was the firm's reputation in the industry and name recognition, and that's why we chose MegaplanIT and Schneider Downs. Certainly smaller or lesser known firms can provide high quality audit services, but we felt it was important to choose a firm or a set of firms that were easily recognizable by our customers. We recently learned that in this presentation that one of the benefits of SOC reports is that it allows service organizations to add their own unique control objectives to measure the quality of the service they provide. To leverage the full benefits of those measurements, you can't get lazy. You'll need to review your environment regularly to identify new measurements as well as changes to existing control objectives to consistently reflect the quality of your services. You'll need to work with your auditing firm to update your control objectives accordingly. So really the three main benefits of the SOC reports to RDX. The SOC2 provides us with a structured mechanism that allows us to continuously improve the quality of our services. We use it as the foundation of our quality improvement initiatives. It also provides us with a competitive advantage, and it facilitates and streamlines the sales process by demonstrating to our customers that RDX is adhering to a well-known industry standard. Like our SOC audit projects, RDX uses the PCI standard as the foundation of our security architecture. It's an excellent starting point to build any shop security framework on. What I think is the most beneficial about PCI is that the controls are well defined, and each objective provides instructions on what you're required to do to comply and the appropriate evidence for compliance. We know that PCI DSS is a well-known industry standard for security. RDX doesn't store or process credit card information, but we felt that PCI was the most appropriate security compliance framework for our shop to adhere to. As I stated in the previous slide, we use our adherence to the PCI standard as the foundation of our security architecture. We then build upon that framework. PCI, although broad in scope, it's not intended to secure your entire enterprise, but it's certainly a good starting point. RDX's security team, led by Jeremy Fox, they've created a robust security environment that includes industry-leading hardware and software products, security training for RDX personnel, and a wealth of required procedures, processes, and a whole host of best practices guidelines. RDX's security team, they're pretty sneaky too. They'll send you a phishing email from time to time just to see if you'll bite. So they give you a little test to see if you're on your toes. As I stated previously, maintaining adherence, it's really more challenging than initially adhering to any compliance framework. Business practices and IT support operations are ever changing. You're always trying to streamline, improve, automate, create new revenue opportunities, implement new hardware and software that improves your ability to do business. You'll need to be vigilant to ensure that those businesses and IT, the operational and environmental changes, don't have an effect on your regulatory compliance initiatives. Once you identify an impact, you'll need to schedule a meeting with your friendly neighborhood auditors to discuss. You'll also need to spot check your evidence on a regular basis. Those spot checks will sometimes identify the changes to your environment that I mentioned. And those spot checks will also help you uncover evidence outliers and anomalies. Once you find them, it's time to meet with your auditors and fill them in. The two takeaways from this slide that, we recommend that a QSA firm perform your PCI audits. Many of our customers are fairly large, some Fortune 500 organizations. A PCI ROC provided by a well-known QSA vendor, it provides the most credibility. During any audit initiative, especially with PCI, you'll need to identify all the service providers and applications you use. Hosting providers, SaaS apps, RDX uses ServiceNow and Salesforce. You may have contracting firms and other service providers you employ. Regardless if you think that they're in scope or not, it's best to bring them to the auditor's attention. You don't want any surprises in the future when you find out that a subset of their services or that product is involved, right, in that regulatory compliance framework. So this kind of wraps up our presentation for today. Before I saw some questions pop up Before we move into the Q&A, if you're interested in learning more about security and compliance, MegaplanIT's contact information is going to be on the next slide. RDX is real competency, right? What we do is data infrastructure management. That's what we're good at. That's what we do. But we know that adhering to regulatory compliance frameworks is a requirement for us to ensure we deliver high-quality database and OS monitoring and administrative services to our customers, and our shop is secure. So, I highly recommend next month's presentation, which is on Microsoft's BI product suite. You can also send me an email or use the link on this slide. It's the big blue text RDX report sign up. It allows you to view a copy of our newsletter. So you can view a sample copy of the newsletter and you can sign up for it. So you can either send me an email or use the link. If you'd like to contact MegaplanIT for more information on their services, their email is in the upper right of the slide also, Mike V. We highly recommend their services to any shop that's required to adhere to a standard set of regulatory requirements, or you just want to improve the security of your environments. So Kelly, do we have any questions?
Yes, we did have a couple that came in during the presentation, and this first one's actually for Mike at MegaplanIT. It reads, we don't store or process credit card information, but want to leverage industry standards to validate the security of our architecture. Would you recommend PCI as the standard to measure ourselves against, or is there a better alternative like ISO that we should leverage?
So that's a great question, actually. There's similarities between NIST, ISO, and PCI. If you were to take the most stringent one, of course, PCI is going to be very specific. There's a lot more requirements, sub-requirements. It's either all or none when it comes to those requirements as well. It's either in place or not in place. When you're dealing with ISO, it's a little bit more of a blended down in the sense of more about organizational policy and process, and even though it does have somewhat the same areas to focus on, I don't think it has the same rigor. So it really depends on your organization's posture for security. If you are considering it at the highest level and you want to take it at the toughest sense of standard or framework, I'd say go for PCI. It's not a bad standard to get. And if you do deal with any of your own clients that deal with credit card directly, it shows that attestation from a third party. But that's not to play down ISO or a NIST standard like cybersecurity or 853.
And we actually had another one come in for you too, Mike, and this one reads, sure. We are a third-party services provider. The majority of our customers don't store or process credit card information. In addition, for the customers that do, it's only a couple of servers. Do you have any recommendations on how we can ensure we adhere to PCI without having to re-architect our entire environment?
The first thing is to determine your scope, determine your support model for your clients. How are you supporting them? What controls would be in place? Which ones would be applicable? And then focus on that. Focus on the security layers around that. So if you're providing remote access into a client to support their data infrastructures, for example, you look at things like hardening platforms, hardening your laptops, hardening your servers, your gateway into those environments, looking at logging and auditing, build configuration standards. So it really depends on that support model, determining scope, and then evaluating the security posture on that scope.
Thank you, Mike. And we had one more come in, and Chris, this one's for you. It says, what's the greatest challenge for RDX when it comes to maintaining compliance?
I think that changes to the business processes in our IT environment that can potentially impact, audit compliance. Like many shops, RDX's business ops and IE architecture, it's pretty dynamic, and there's a lot of changes, and there's lots of different units involved. We're constantly improving our products and our processes. We need to be extremely vigilant, like all shops, about evaluating the impact the changes have on our ability to comply with audit requirements. Our security and our compliance team, they participate in change management meetings, they review the changes, but it doesn't have to be a major change that can lead to surprise during the next audit period. I think that's where self-audits can help. We perform those self-audits and we review the evidence. We look for anomalies, evidence that doesn't match our pass-fail, but we also kind of look at it to see if there's any changes to the systems that could possibly impact our ability to comply. I noticed that in the webinar, Kelly, in the drop down there was 2 questions on. Oh, I see that. Did you answer them? Saying that the presentation slides will be made available.
Yes, they were.
Okay.
It was the same question about the slide deck, but that has been addressed.
Okay, good deal. So, what we'll do is we will make a copy of the PowerPoints. They'll be uploaded to SlideShare, and I'm sure Kelly responded to that in her answer. But we're also going to make the video recording of today's discussion also available on our YouTube channel, and we'll send a link to everybody, and also promote that link on LinkedIn. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar.
We actually had another question that just came in right now.
Okay. All right.
It says, what do you think the time frame is on average from planning to certification?
Is that for Chris or myself?
I think you would be best to answer that, Mike. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. So it depends. It depends on the size and complexity of your environment, the maturity of your security controls, and whether or not you know your scope and you know where your data resides. There's organizations I walked through and they were literally so well polished in the controls that they were able to achieve compliance within 2 to 3 months. There's other organizations where I've worked with hand in hand with them as a trusted advisor, helping them re-architect their security controls, policy and procedures and standards, and it would take anywhere from 8 months to a year, just because they never thought about these requirements. They're very complex. A report on compliance can be several hundred pages long. So it really depends on the maturity of that organization's security posture. Generally speaking, it really also depends on the QSA or assessor you're working with. If that assessor's part of their contracts to provide you that type of guidance, support, advisory, remediation assistance, and documentation creation and collection, then you're going to achieve your compliance a little bit quicker. If you hire just an auditor who comes in and stamps a report compliant or non-compliant, well, now you have to go back to your team and use that for interpretation to say, well, what is the assessor looking for? And now I have to come up with the hours and internal resources to develop the documentation, identify and re-architect the security environment.
Oh, it was a great question. So, Kelly, we don't have any more. Is that the last one?
That's it.
Okay. So, once again, thanks everybody for attending. We'll make the slides available as well as a video. And have a great weekend. And you'll be getting an email from us with those links. So, thank you very much, everybody. And thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Great presentation.